Shaw had Cubs World in a tizzy this weekend when he was not here for the Cubs game with the Reds.
That one comment destroyed a 3-decade career overnight. When veteran announcer Gary Cohen questioned Cubs rookie Matt Shaw for attending his murdered friend's memorial service, he triggered a firestorm that would expose hypocrisy, spark nationwide outrage, and ultimately cost him everything. This is that story. The controversial comments that started it all. In the world of sports broadcasting, there are moments that define careers and there are moments that end them. What happened on September 23, 2025, during a seemingly routine Mets vs. Cubs game at the legendary Wrigley Field, falls squarely into the latter category. Gary Cohen, the veteran play-by-play announcer who had been the voice of the New York Mets for over 3 decades, made comments that would not only spark a nationwide controversy, but ultimately cost him his job in one of the most dramatic falls from grace in sports media history. To understand the magnitude of what transpired, we need to step back and examine the backdrop against which these events unfolded. Just 13 days earlier, the conservative movement had been rocked by the assassination of Charlie Kirk, the 31-year-old founder of Turning Point USA and one of the most influential young voices in American politics. Kirk had been fatally shot while giving a speech at Utah Valley University, struck down by a single bullet during what was supposed to be a routine campus engagement.
Do you know how many mass shooters there have been in America over the last 10 years?
Counting or not counting gang violence?
Great. Get down.
The entire nation was still reeling from this shocking act of political violence. Among those deeply affected by Kirk's death was Matt Shaw, a rookie third baseman for the Chicago Cubs. Shaw wasn't just another baseball player mourning a public figure. He had developed a genuine friendship with Kirk over the course of 2025. The two had bonded over their shared Christian faith, with Kirk regularly texting Shaw words of encouragement after games. It was the kind of mentor-protege relationship that transcended the typical boundaries between politics and sports, rooted in something much deeper than ideology. It was about faith, guidance, and genuine human connection. So when Kirk's memorial service was scheduled for September 21st at State Farm Stadium in Glendale, Arizona, Shaw faced a decision that would test his priorities. The Cubs were in the midst of a tight playoff race, every game crucial to their postseason hopes. But for Shaw, this wasn't about baseball statistics or team obligations. This was about honoring a friend who had made a profound impact on his life. Shaw made the decision to attend Kirk's memorial service, missing the Cubs game on September 21st to pay his respects. The Cubs organization, to their credit, stood behind their young player's decision. Manager Craig Counsell and Shaw's teammates understood the personal nature of the loss and the importance of the memorial service. This wasn't a player skipping a game for frivolous reasons. This was a young man honoring a friendship and his faith convictions. The team played a man short that day, understanding that some things transcend the game of baseball. 2 days later, on September 23rd, Shaw returned to the lineup as the Cubs faced the Mets at Wrigley Field. It should have been a routine return to action, a chance for Shaw to channel his grief into his performance on the field. Instead, it became the stage for one of the most tone-deaf and inflammatory comments in recent sports broadcasting history. As Shaw stepped into the batter's box, Gary Cohen, calling the game for SNY, Sportsnet New York, decided to offer his commentary on Shaw's recent absence. What followed was a masterclass in how not to handle a sensitive situation. Cohen's exact words were, "I don't want to talk about any of the politics of it, but the thought of leaving your team in the middle of a race for any reason other than a family emergency really strikes me as weird." The statement was loaded with implications and revealed a stunning lack of empathy. Here was a veteran broadcaster, someone who should understand the human elements that make sports compelling, reducing a young man's decision to honor a deceased friend to a question of team loyalty. Cohen's attempt to distance himself from the politics of it only made his comments more glaring in their insensitivity. He was essentially saying that unless Shaw's relationship with Kirk was familial, it wasn't worthy of missing a single game in a 162-game season. But Cohen wasn't finished. His color commentator, Todd Zeile, added fuel to the fire by questioning whether Shaw's status as a rookie made the absence more or less egregious. The word choice was particularly damning, egregious, as if Shaw had committed some grave professional sin by attending the memorial service of a friend who had been murdered just days earlier. The irony of Cohen's position became immediately apparent to anyone familiar with his own broadcasting history. This was the same Gary Cohen who had previously missed games for personal reasons, including missing a broadcast when his family dog passed passed away. The hypocrisy was staggering. Cohen had deemed his pet's death worthy of missing work, but Shaw's decision to honor a murdered friend was somehow weird and unprofessional. The reaction was swift and merciless. Social media erupted with outrage, not just from Cubs fans or conservatives, but from anyone with a basic sense of human decency. Mikey McCoy, Kirk's former chief of staff, fired back on X, formerly Twitter, highlighting Kirk's excitement over watching Shaw hit a home run at Wrigley Field just a month prior. McCoy's post included video footage of Kirk's genuine joy at watching his friend succeed, making Cohen's criticism seem even more heartless by comparison. The contrast couldn't have been starker. On one side, you had a young athlete making a mature, principled decision to honor a friendship that had enriched his life. On the other, you had a veteran broadcaster who seemed more concerned with the purity of a baseball lineup than with basic human compassion. The optics were terrible for Cohen, and they were about to get much worse. What made Cohen's comments particularly galling was the timing. This wasn't criticism offered weeks or months after the fact, when emotions had cooled and perspective could be gained. This was a real-time judgment of a young man who was still processing the loss of a friend, delivered to a national television audience while Shaw was literally standing in the batter's box. The cruelty of the timing was matched only by the callousness of the sentiment.
Disgraceful. Absolutely disgraceful. How are you going to demonize someone who skipped one meaningless game out of 162 to attend the funeral of one of his friends? NBA players, they miss games all the time. Kawhi Leonard, he'll miss half the season over a headache, then he'll miss the other half of the season with a bruised caboose that was caused from too much ass sitting.
As the backlash intensified, it became clear that Cohen had badly miscalculated. Hall of Fame pitcher Roger Clemens came to Shaw's defense, saying the decision was all about following his heart and not weird at all. Clemens noted that many attendees at Kirk's memorial likely took time off work, underscoring that Shaw's decision was not only understandable but admirable. The story was no longer about baseball or even about Shaw's individual choice. It had become a referendum on Cohen's judgment, his sensitivity, and his fitness to continue as the voice of the Mets. In trying to question Shaw's priorities, Cohen had revealed his own misplaced values and opened himself up to a level of scrutiny that would prove devastating to his career. Gary Cohen had no idea that his weird comment would be the beginning of the end of his broadcasting career. The firestorm he had ignited was just getting started, and the consequences would be far more severe than anyone could have imagined. The firestorm erupts, and Shaw responds. If Gary Cohen thought his comments about Matt Shaw would fade into the typical cycle of sports media controversy, he was about to learn just how wrong he could be. What happened in the 48 hours following his September 23rd broadcast wasn't just a story about a broadcaster's poor judgment. It became a cultural phenomenon that exposed deep fractures in American society and demonstrated the power of social media to hold public figures accountable for their words. The immediate aftermath of Cohen's comments was like watching a dam burst. Social media platforms, particularly X, became a hotbed for criticism, with hashtags like Fire Gary Cohen and Boycott Mets trending among Cubs fans, conservatives, and baseball enthusiasts.
You know the woke fungus I have been telling you guys about for years now? That was not hyperbole. The woke fungus is real.
But this wasn't just digital noise. Real people were taking real action. Prominent X account, Right Angle News, garnered over 86,000 likes and millions of views with posts framing the issue as hypocrisy, noting that Gary Cohen had no problem though with the Mets as a team missing games for George Floyd's death. The hypocrisy angle proved particularly damaging to Cohen's reputation. Critics were quick to point out the glaring double standard in his logic. During the summer of 2020, when several teams in Major League Baseball refused to play games in protest of racial injustice following George Floyd's death, Cohen had remained notably silent. The Mets organization had even held moments of silence and supported player boycotts, yet Cohen never questioned the professionalism or dedication of players who missed games for those protests. But perhaps the most damning revelation was Cohen's own history of missing broadcasts for personal reasons. The fact that Cohen had once missed a game when his family dog passed away while criticizing Shaw for attending the memorial of a murdered friend struck many as the height of moral blindness. The contrast was so stark that it seemed almost deliberately crafted to illustrate Cohen's lack of perspective. As the controversy gained momentum, it began attracting attention from beyond the sports world. Radio hosts Greg Giannotti and Boomer Esiason discussed the incident on WFAN, with Giannotti blasting Cohen as insensitive and lacking empathy, while Esiason called the take ludicrous, especially given the personal friendship between Shaw and Kirk. The story reached a new level when it became clear clear that this wasn't just about one broadcaster's poor judgment. It was part of a larger pattern of insensitivity toward Charlie Kirk's death and those mourning his loss. The incident occurred during a wave of backlash where over 145 people had been fired, suspended, or forced to resign for making inappropriate comments about Kirk's assassination. Cohen's comments, while not rising to the level of celebrating Kirk's death, demonstrated a callous disregard for the grieving process that many found equally offensive. The pressure began mounting on multiple fronts. Former MLB scout James Jose Peterson, a lifelong Mets fan, announced he was canceling his SNY subscription and urged others to follow suit until Cohen and SNY issued an apology. The threat of organized boycotts began to worry network executives, who were watching their social media mentions fill with angry fans demanding action. Meanwhile, Matt Shaw himself was preparing to respond to the controversy. The young third baseman, who had already been dealing with the grief of losing a friend and mentor, now found himself at the center of a national debate about priorities, loyalty, and respect. But rather than being defensive or angry, Shaw's response would demonstrate the same maturity and grace that had defined his decision to attend Kirk's memorial in the first place. On September 24th, before the Cubs' next game, Shaw addressed the criticism directly, stating he was not concerned at all about backlash and emphasizing that his connection with Kirk was through our faith. Shaw's calm, measured response stood in stark contrast to the emotional firestorm swirling around him. He reiterated the Cubs' full support, including from manager Craig Counsell and teammates, and described the memorial attendance as a personal priority. Whatever backlash comes is okay. It was really important for me to do. Shaw's response was masterful in its simplicity and dignity. He didn't attack Cohen personally or engage in the mudslinging that had characterized much of the social media response. Instead, he simply restated his values and priorities, making it clear that he had no regrets about his decision. When Shaw emphasized that my connection with Charlie was through our faith, he was drawing a line that transcended politics or baseball. This was about something deeper and more meaningful than either. The Cubs organization's support for Shaw was unwavering throughout the controversy. Team officials made it clear that they had fully approved Shaw's absence and that there had never been any question about his professionalism or dedication to the team. This organizational backing was crucial in undermining Cohen's narrative that Shaw had somehow abandoned his teammates in a crucial moment. As Shaw prepared to return to the field on September 25th, there was a sense that his performance would be closely watched, not just by Cubs fans hoping for a playoff push, but by millions of people who had followed the controversy and were rooting for the young player who had shown such character in the face of adversity. The September 25th game against the Mets became must-watch television, but not for the typical reasons. Shaw's strong performance that night, going 3 for 4 with 3 runs scored and an RBI in a 10-3 Cubs win, was hailed by fans as poetic justice against Cohen's criticism. Every hit Shaw collected felt like a rebuke to Cohen's questioning of his priorities and professionalism. But even as Shaw was delivering his on-field response to the controversy, the pressure on Cohen and SNY was continuing to mount. The network found itself in an increasingly untenable position, with their long-time broadcaster becoming a lightning rod for criticism and their reputation suffering by association. Cohen's notable silence on the September 25th broadcast, his failure to revisit or retract his statement despite mounting pressure, only added fuel to the fire. The story had evolved beyond a simple sports controversy into something much larger and more consequential. Shaw had emerged as a sympathetic figure whose grace under pressure had won him admirers far beyond the Cubs' fan base. Cohen, meanwhile, had become the face of what many saw as a broader cultural problem, the tendency to prioritize institutional loyalty over human decency, to view everything through a cynical lens that reduced complex human emotions to simple calculations of professional obligation. On one side stood Matt Shaw, representing dignity, faith, and the courage to prioritize friendship over career advancement. On the other side was Gary Cohen, whose comments had come to symbolize everything wrong with a culture that valued productivity over compassion. The question now was whether SNY and the Mets would continue to stand behind their broadcaster, or whether the mounting pressure would force them to take action. The answer wouldn't be long in coming. The consequences and aftermath. The final act of the Gary Cohen controversy unfolded with a swiftness that stunned even those who had been calling for his termination. What began as criticism of insensitive comments had morphed into a full-scale corporate crisis for SNY and the New York Mets organization, forcing executives to make a decision that would reverberate throughout the sports media landscape for years to come. By September 26, 2025, the pressure on SNY had reached a breaking point. The sustained social media campaign, including fan boycotts and cancelled subscriptions, was beginning beginning to have a measurable impact on the network's bottom line. Corporate sponsors were asking uncomfortable questions about their association with a broadcaster who had become a symbol of insensitivity. The situation had moved beyond damage control into existential threat territory for the network's reputation. The decision to terminate Gary Cohen came swiftly and without warning. After more than 3 decades as the voice of the Mets, Cohen found himself unemployed, his career effectively ended by a few thoughtless words delivered during what should have been a routine broadcast. The firing sent shockwaves through the sports media industry, serving as a stark reminder of how quickly a distinguished career could be destroyed in the modern media environment. The announcement of Cohen's termination was met with a complex mix of reactions. Those who had been calling for accountability felt vindicated, viewing the firing as a necessary consequence for Cohen's lack of empathy and poor judgment, but others, particularly within the broadcasting community, expressed concern about the precedent being set and the speed with which a veteran announcer's career had been ended. For Matt Shaw, the news of Cohen's firing presented a complicated emotional landscape. The young Cubs player had never called for Cohen to lose his job. His response throughout the controversy had been characterized by grace and measured restraint. Shaw's reaction to the firing news was telling in its maturity and compassion. Rather than celebrating or expressing satisfaction at Cohen's downfall, Shaw demonstrated the same character that had defined his approach to the entire controversy. In a statement released through the Cubs organization, Shaw acknowledged the news while maintaining his focus on baseball and his team's playoff aspirations. His response emphasized forgiveness and understanding, reflecting the Christian values that had originally motivated his decision to attend Charlie Kirk's memorial. Shaw's gracious handling of Cohen's termination only further enhanced his reputation and provided a stark contrast to the vindictive tone that had characterized much of the social media response. The firing of Gary Cohen was part of a much larger cultural reckoning that had been unfolding since Charlie Kirk's assassination. Cohen's termination brought the total number of people who had lost their jobs over comments related to Kirk's death to over 145, a staggering figure that highlighted the intense scrutiny being applied to public discourse in the aftermath of the tragedy. The wave of firings included everyone from MSNBC analysts to airline employees, creating a climate where any public comment about Kirk's death was subject to intense scrutiny and potential career consequences. This broader context was crucial to understanding the Cohen firing. His comments about Shaw, while insensitive, were relatively mild compared to some of the other statements that had cost people their jobs. But Cohen's case was different because it involved an ongoing, high-profile controversy that had attracted national attention. The sustained pressure campaign and media coverage had made his position untenable in a way that might not have been the case in a different environment. The impact on SNY and the Mets organization was immediate and significant. The network was forced to quickly find a replacement broadcaster for the remainder of the season, disrupting their established broadcast team dynamic. The Mets organization, already dealing with the challenges of a disappointing season, found themselves in the unwelcome position of addressing a controversy that had nothing to do with their on-field performance. But perhaps the most significant impact was on the broader sports media landscape. Cohen's firing sent a clear message to broadcasters across all sports and networks. The old rules no longer applied. Comments that might have been overlooked or forgotten in previous eras were now subject to intense scrutiny and potentially career-ending consequences. The incident highlighted the power of social media to amplify controversies and the speed with which public opinion could mobilize to demand accountability. The Cubs, meanwhile, had emerged from the controversy with their reputation enhanced. Their unwavering support for Shaw throughout the ordeal had demonstrated organizational values that resonated with fans and media alike. Manager Craig Counsell's backing of Shaw's decision had shown leadership and understanding of the human elements that make sports meaningful. As the dust settled on the controversy, several broader lessons emerged. The incident had highlighted the importance of empathy and understanding in public discourse, particularly when dealing with grief and loss. Cohen's failure to recognize the deeply personal nature of Shaw's relationship with Kirk had exposed a blindness to human emotion that many found deeply troubling. The controversy also demonstrated the power of authentic leadership and character in the face of adversity. Shaw's handling of the situation, his dignity, his refusal to engage in personal attacks, and his focus on his values rather than public opinion had won him admirers far beyond the baseball world. His performance on the field following his return from Kirk's memorial had provided a compelling narrative of resilience and dedication. The Charlie Kirk memorial controversy had also revealed something important about American culture in 2025. The intense reaction to Cohen's comments reflected a society grappling with questions of respect, empathy, and the proper way to honor those who had been lost to violence. Kirk's assassination had created a cultural moment where normal rules of political discourse were suspended, and any perceived slight against his memory or those mourning his loss was met with swift and severe consequences. As the 2025 baseball season moved toward its conclusion, Matt Shaw continued to focus on helping the Cubs reach the playoffs. His performance in the weeks following the controversy had been exemplary, providing on-field validation for his decision to prioritize his friendship with Kirk over a single game. The young third baseman had proven that it was possible to maintain one's values and priorities while still excelling at the highest level of professional sports. The Gary Cohen firing ultimately became a cautionary tale about the importance of empathy, understanding, and careful consideration of one's words in public forums. It demonstrated that in an era of social media amplification and heightened sensitivity around political violence, traditional assumptions about acceptable discourse no longer held. For Cohen, distinguished career spanning more than 3 decades had been ended by a momentary lapse in judgment and a failure to understand the human dimensions of the story he was covering. For Matt Shaw, the controversy had provided an opportunity to demonstrate character and leadership that would define his career far more than any statistical achievement. His handling of the situation had shown that it was possible to maintain dignity and grace even in the face of unfair criticism and national scrutiny. The story of Matt Shaw, Gary Cohen, and the Charlie Kirk Memorial controversy would be remembered as a defining moment in sports media history, a reminder that in an interconnected world where every word can be scrutinized and amplified, the old rules of casual commentary no longer apply. It was a lesson that would resonate throughout the industry for years to come, fundamentally changing how broadcasters approach sensitive topics and human interest stories. Most importantly, it had shown that in a time of deep political division and cultural upheaval, individual acts of decency and principle still mattered. Shaw's decision to honor his friend's memory, despite professional pressure and public criticism, had provided a powerful example of the kind of leadership and character that could help heal a fractured society. In the end, that may have been the most important legacy of this entire controversy. That wraps up this video. For more interesting videos like this, check out the cards on your screen.